Good evening, everyone. I'm Annette Nabavi, and I'm one of the directors here at WiTT. I firstly want to welcome all of you to this panel session on 5G. It's all about what makes it different from 4G. Why isn't it just 4G on steroids? Before I start some brief housekeeping, we'll mute everyone for the panel session and have only the speaker videos active. And given the numbers, we would also ask you to put your questions into the chat once the speakers are finished, and we'll then call on people to ask their questions individually. Also, just note that we are actually recording the event tonight. We're going to cover a range of topics tonight, including network architecture, technology, deployment, the rollout issues, spectrum allocation, and importantly, the development of use cases in different industries. And to do that, we've brought together a really great panel of women. I'm very proud that we have such a good panel, all of women. So let me begin briefly by introducing them. Their full bios are, of course, on the website, and you can have a good look at those. I won't be going into every last detail of their career progression. They're all very eminent. First up, we have Sylvia Liu. Sylvia's head of technology strategy at u-blox. She has over a decade of experience in the cellular industry. She's lived through 4 mobile generations so far: 2G, 3G, 4G, now 5G, and clearly imminently 6G. And she was recently recognized as one of the UK's top 50 women in engineering. She sits on a number of boards and advises the UK government on 5G strategy. Sylvia will be followed by Cristina. Cristina is the Director of Spectrum Insight and Analysis at Ofcom, and she leads all Ofcom's work on 5G. Sylvia will be followed by Ros Singleton. Ros chairs the UK 5G Advisory Board, amongst many, many other things. I won't go into all the things that Ros does. You can look on the website. She will introduce us to the work of UK 5G, and she'll begin to answer the question of what are these opportunities that are opened up to us by the deployment of the 5G networks. Our last 2 speakers are going to speak about different aspects of these opportunities. Catherine Gull is Head of Business Development at 3 UK. Although I have to say she's currently in Houston recovering from the snowstorm, which cut electricity for 48 hours. And she and her family had to huddle under blankets during that time. It sounds dreadful. Catherine will share with us her experiences of using private 5G networks. 5G private networks are one of the really important differentiators of the 5G technology rollout compared to other large-scale mobile networks. You won't have heard much of 4G private networks, but 5G are definitely something to watch and something where I think we'll see a lot going on. Last but not least, I'm going to ask Claire Harvey to talk about 5G in the creative industries. Claire is chair of the UK 5G Creative Industries Working Group, and she's an account director for Redby Media. So let's start with the networks, the architecture, the underlying new technologies that make 5G different from just an augmented 4G. Sylvia's got a couple of slides which she's going to help us, will help us to understand this. So Sylvia, over to you.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for the invite. Really good to see you all. So in the next couple of slides, I will kickstart with the key enablers, which have made 5G different to 4G technologies. And then we will have a look at the availability timeline. Essentially, so this is essentially the evolution between different mobile network generations has tended to be incremental in many ways in terms of data rate and capacity. So this slide, we will first look at the spectrum, because that's essentially the key fundamental and critical enablers to make sure each mobile generations, when they are introduced, and they can be harmonized, coexist. So of course, here also a big kudos to the colleagues from Ofcom, and one of our expert panelists, Cristina from Ofcom, probably will tell us more about that later. But broadly, if we look at this slide at a very high level, we can see those different spectrum bands as low band, mid band, and high band, as shown on this slide. So for 4G, I would illustrate the portion of the spectrum used widely, mainly in the low band and part of the mid band. For 5G, we have two frequency ranges. Frequency range 1 on the left-hand side, that's mainly used for nationwide regional mobile coverage or dedicated areas like stadium, factory floor, or industry campus. On the right-hand side, frequency range 2, that's the millimeter wave range, where we have a big trunk of contiguous spectrum bands here. But because of short wavelengths, millimeter wave do suffer from high propagation loss and are sensitive to blockage, it is most suitable for dense urban or dedicated areas to boost throughput. Now, if we click it, as we can see, 5G allow access to more and high spectrum frequencies than 4G, and the contiguous spectrum enables faster and more efficient 5G network deployments. It also helps increase a number of different types of users or things which I touch upon later. And finally, the new spectrum allocation helps to enable innovation and also helps to create new services. So that's a very brief summary of the differences in terms of spectrum. Now move on to the technology enablers, which are also very interesting and exciting. Here I've picked up 8 new 5G technology components. This is not intended to be a comprehensive list, but to give some ideas on the new 5G capabilities. So first on the top left is fundamental. That's what most people talk about in terms of new radio or NR. It is a new air interface that is flexible to allow 5G to operate in the new spectrum bands, as we see on the previous slide. It is also designed to fit a diverse range of requirements and is forward compatible in case there's any future new service types coming in. Next is ultra reliable low latency communication capability designed for latency sensitive applications such as factory automation, robotics, augmented reality, which require end-to-end latency in the order of several milliseconds. So next, edge compute, which goes hand in hand with URLC. It can be used to offload processing, for example, sensors to the cloud. This will then make device design simpler and also help to reduce device battery life and cost. It also means that the operational data can be kept on the premises if privacy and security are the prime concern. In terms of power and energy efficiency, consumption reduction, as otherwise network densification would mean higher energy expenditure. And this, of course, will increase operators' operational expenses. So that's also a very important feature in the 5G era. Now move on to top right, we have cellular-based V2X or vehicle to everything for the automotive sector. Can be used to enable connectivity between cars, infrastructures, or pedestrians. So when traffic and their surroundings are all connected, it helps to improve road safety and traffic efficiency. Satellite-based IoT, which is the next one. So this is a new technology under making to enable direct communications from the satellite at LEO and GEO constellations directly to sensors like Nabavi based on Nabavi IoT technology, without the need for immediate gateway, intermediate gateway, or backhaul technology. This can be used especially for critical Internet of Things application, which need service continuity, and also by doing this converged connectivity helps to complement the spectrum resources between the terrestrial and satellite operators as well. Then moving on, next, which is a high precise positioning for indoor. So 5G NR-based localization will help to enable sub-meter accuracy positioning because of its broader frequency spectrum and potentially MIMO capability. This is particularly helpful to complement GNSS in locations where it cannot reach. So some places like indoors and factory environment, you normally can't get GPS signal. So here is where 5G plays an interesting role here. And then finally, time-sensitive networking. It allows essentially smooth integration and a migration of 5G with traditional IEEE-based industrial Ethernet, especially when we are deploying 5G in brownfields. For example, factory floor, that's essential components or translator between the two clock domains of the network. So as you can see, in the 5G era, there are at least 8 technology components under the umbrella of 5G. It is more than incremental, but the technology landscape is much more complicated, I'd say, than what we had in the 4G days. Now, to put those technologies into perspective on the technology roadmap, here we will briefly take a look at their availability timeline. So 3 trends I'd like to highlight here. As you can see, first of all, at the bottom, LTE-based LPWA, which is a low power wide area access technology, will continue to evolve in the 5G era. That's for technology like LTE-M and narrowband IoT for smart meters and sensors, which demand long battery life and low device cost. At the top, we have high-end mobile broadband evolution, mainly for consumer devices and fixed wireless access point, which demands high data rate and capacity. And if you click, in fact, most of the devices on the market today are based on this flavor of 5G, which is good, but also what's interesting and becoming interesting is if you click in the middle, is the different flavors of 5G to enable connectivities for industry beyond the consumer sector. So these are the technology which I mentioned earlier in the previous slide. So it is important, of course, to highlight that 5G is not done yet. So still lots to come in the next 2 to 5 years, especially with those releases coming, then we will have commercial products in the market in the next 2 to 5 years. So with these new capabilities, it will help to indeed expand connectivities beyond the consumer sector. So those we'll be expecting to see new products and services into automotive, industrial sectors, satellite, media, utility, and public safety sector. Again, so all 5G, what's the beauty of 5G? And the difference here is really to expand the cellular connectivity beyond the consumer sector into more diverse markets in the next at least 10 years. So that's all I like to share with you.
Fantastic. That was a really interesting run through, and I think has given people lots of different parts of the technology to think about and potentially have a look at themselves. But there's still 1 or 2 sort of terminologies that I've come across that I still don't really understand. One of them is Open RAN. We keep hearing about Open RAN, and perhaps you could give us some idea of why that keeps coming up in the context of 5G.
Yeah, that's a big buzzword, and I believe there's several people on the panel who's expert on this area. So I'm looking at you, Ross, which is the government on that policy. So
we can have somebody else answer it if you want to. It's not a problem.
Yeah. It's become interesting because of the decoupling of software and hardware, and then you then have more flexibility of implementing, especially the RAN functionality in the software. And now it opens doors for more a diverse range of vendor options. I would stop here, but there's also lots of geopolitical reasons behind it. But of course, what's interesting and positive of that movement is the innovation. So we see a lot of companies bring different solutions, especially to the factory floor, right? So we see different flavors of deployment options, especially standalone options, which need a dedicated core. And we're seeing a wide range of vendors supplying those markets. So that's really good to see.
That's interesting. So is Open Radio Access Network therefore a little bit like open source software in the IT world?
Well, the synergy here is flexibility, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's really interesting. Another question that always fascinates me is we talk about edge computing, but I'm never quite sure where the edge is. Can you define what the edge is on this edge computing? I mean, is it my desktop device? Is it a smartphone? Is it the edge of a cloud? Is it on-prem? Does it have a definition in any way?
Yeah, it could be anything. Yeah, so the edge can be on the gateway, right? Edge can be on the cloud, or edge could be on your phone. So it really depends on the use case and what sort of data you like to offload to where. And certainly the latency requirements play a big role here, because if you want application that is latency sensitive, so you like really to have the edge located on the factory floor, for example, or on the premises, and then that round trip delay can be minimized. The other case is to offload data, which then you be able to reduce the device cost, because the processing power be done on the edge compute, and you know, that would make your device cheaper and you know, with longer battery life. And there's also the concept of fork, which is you know, sort of between device and the edge.
Right. Knife and fork, or just fork?
I'm sorry, yeah. So yeah, so but of course, for some low cost IoT sensors, it also depends on the what sort of data. If it's temperature, humidity, or sensor information, you could potentially process straight away on the IoT sensor or device itself without doing that extra effort, sending back.
Yeah. No, okay, fine. Just a couple of other little questions, again, around some of the terminology I've come across. And you and I talked briefly about multiple in, multiple out, the creation of multiple radio paths, and you said it was a 4G type thing. But what the thing that I think is on my mind is, I've heard in the press and many places that 5G will require huge numbers of antennas, little masts everywhere. Does the idea of multiple transmitters and receivers with multiple radio paths, the sort of MIMO idea, mean that will it going to have less antenna, or are the two not connected in any way?
Yeah, so that's a really good one you brought up. So the MIMO, it's not new, but there's new technology introduced in the 5G era, which essentially help to compensate, because there's a lot of physics, right? When we move to a higher spectrum frequency, the coverage is much less than if you're operating a low band, right? So how do you compensate those losses in dB? Then either by diversity, either the receiver transmission diversity, which means that you have to build up lots of antennas either at the receiver or transmitter side. And that's why we hear there's 64 or up to 128 MIMO elements, which is quite fantastic, amazing technology. But of course, that also adds energy consumption, extra energy consumption, which is an interesting topic, I think, to look at, especially on the network side. But on the device side, that's a different story, right? So we're only talking about up to 4 receive and transmission antennas. So it's less complex, I would say, compared to the network side.
Oh, well, that is also interesting. I mean, there are multiple other elements that one reads about, and I'm sure that some of our audience will have specific questions. But I'd like to sort of move on now to the spectrum side, which you covered very briefly. But I think with Cristina here, let's have a little bit more of a look at how this is working, both in the UK and elsewhere. I think I'd like to start, Cristina, by asking you a little bit about the fundamental principles that Ofcom applies to the allocation of spectrum, not particularly the auctions now, but very much looking at what is Ofcom trying to do in terms of spectrum allocation. Cristina, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to see whether it was me, but it's not me generating the feedback. So hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you very much, Annette, for the question, and good evening, everyone. So Ofcom primary function and primary duty with regards to spectrum is to ensure its optimal use, and by its optimal use, what we consider is the most efficient use or user of that spectrum, which is a sort of common kind of approach when you talk about a sort of finite resource, how to ensure its optimal spectrum. So you can imagine that our job in spectrum management is actually a balancing act with so many different application and use cases. So of course here we're talking about 5G, but Sylvia has also identified satellites. Satellites need spectrum as well, and there are many other uses of spectrum upon which our life depends. To be honest with you, Wi-Fi requires spectrum, Bluetooth requires spectrum. So the use of wireless resources is quite wide-ranging. So how we're driven by our duty to ensure the optimal use of spectrum. And with regards to 5G, the process in allocating the spectrum bands that Sylvia has identified at lower frequency, mid-frequency, and high frequency actually started quite a few years ago. I think 2016, if I'm not wrong, at the international level, where we actually coordinate with European players, and this is not only EU, but it's wider. It's very often wider than EU, because we're talking about Europe, including Russia and other countries, where we're looking at which are the bands for new technologies, being satellite, being mobile, etc. And how do we harmonize? And it's a very long process actually to identify bands that can deliver this common platform, and therefore enable an ecosystem of devices to develop on the basis of the bands that were identified. And this is where we're finding ourselves right now with 5G, with bands, with spectrum at 700 megahertz, at 3.4, 3.8, and 26 gigahertz, which is the pioneer band at very high frequency. Again, something where technology has enabled this type of access.
I wanted to find out whether or not maximization of fees is part of the goal. And you talk very eloquently about making sure people can use the spectrum well, but an auction is obviously about money as well. So is that part of the objective?
Absolutely. It's absolutely not part of the objective. As I said, our duty is to enable the efficient use. And when we are in a situation of excess demand, as normally we are in the context of mobile spectrum, we run auction to ensure that the spectrum reflects the market value that operators give to that specific resource. So there is never a sort of money-raising exercise from Ofcom view. There is a how can we ensure the efficient, and I would say not only user, but user can access the resources they have. And it's completely market-driven. We are very much sort of market-led approach here.
Yeah. So looking at the way that spectrum has been allocated for 3G and 4G, connectivity still remains a problem. Is 5G going to solve that?
So I would start by saying that in reality, through the agreement reached last year between the government and the MNO, the single shared network, is it rural network? Yes, SRN. Actually, we're going to achieve 90% coverage of landmass. So that is quite a significant landmass coverage across MNOs, and potentially a 95%. With all of them combined. So that is going to reach every part of the UK, generating, ensuring a 2 megabits per second speed at the edge of a cell. So that's quite a good coverage that government has agreed with MNOs to deliver. And many MNOs have already started building shared access, shared sites across the UK. 5G has got the potential to, for now, deliver a lot of capacity where that capacity is required, and this is how the MNOs have started deploying a 5G from areas of high demand. Will it reach different areas? Possibly, when refarming of different bands is starting. And by refarming, what I mean is moving to new technologies of already existing bands that are covering the UK. So it is possible, but it's a gradual process, and it's definitely driven by the demand. So that is what has driven MNO's deployment today. Additionally, I think, and going back to what Sylvia was saying with regards to private network solution, the factories of the future, the logistic warehouses of the future, again, that those are going to be where 5G is needed. 5G will be deployed to deliver the solutions that are required by the different customers, being a factory or being a logistic player of the future.
We'll probably go into that in a little bit more detail when we talk about private networks with Catherine, so we might get you to come back on that at that point. But again, because we've got a lot of different things to talk about, I want now to move on a little bit to the use cases that are being underpinned by the work that Cristina, you're doing, and Sylvia has explained to us on the technology side, and ask Roz to talk about the work of the UK 5G group and explain to us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that, Annette. So like I can introduce me. I am the chair of the UK 5G Advisory Board, which means there are a number of other people on this panel who are members of the advisory board, which is great. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So the UK Advisory Board actually it is a little bit more than just an advisory board. So we actually consist of a board that meets a couple of times a year and discusses how to help support the government in its aim, for which it created UK 5G, of encouraging the ecosystem around 5G in the UK. So we have 3 key aims that you can see there. So supporting the development of the UK ecosystem, managing information about activities and learnings particularly that happen from test beds and trials, which I'll come on to in a little bit, and promoting the capabilities of UK 5G internationally. As part of that, we have 8 working groups. I won't go through a list of them. Obviously, Claire is the chair of the Creative Industries Working Group, who are very active, I'm going to say, and have been for the last year. And those working groups operate in a number of areas. The latest one we've started up is about environment and sustainability. And essentially they operate to extend, if you like, our reach much further than an advisory board of 26 people who are largely telco people could do. I'm immensely proud of the work they're doing. They're reaching out to a very wide community, including local enterprise partnerships, the security community, local councils, the international community as well, you know, manufacturing, those sorts of things. And the idea is that they're actually doing working, for example, with local enterprise partnerships and councils, excuse me, around 5G and health, to make sure that we're sending out consistent messages. At the same time, we also have a website which manages the learning. So on uk5g.org, this is a plug, anyone can join. It's absolutely free. And it is full of really useful information about the projects we've been running, about the lessons we've learned, which actually, you know, is invaluable. And we are trying to collate in more and more usable ways, and has tools on it like a supplier directory that will help you, if you're interested in this sort of thing, actually figure out which suppliers do what. Because right now, if you're not a telco person, why would you know your RAN from your core, from your edge, from your backhaul? So, you know, trying to help people be guided through that process to find the right suppliers to help them. So we also produce newsletters every couple of weeks. They're very short, I promise. They take normally around 1 minute to 2 minutes to read. And we sort of take it in turns, if you like, to write those. So I would genuinely say, if you're interested in 5G, it's a resource worth thinking about using or having. Next slide, please, Annette. So the key drivers around the work we've been doing in this are around the test beds and trials projects. So to drive learning, to develop that ecosystem, to get some real use cases, because all the technology in the world is no good if you don't know how to use it. If you think about 4G, and I use this example a lot, when 4G started, I couldn't imagine banking on my phone, for example, and now I think one of my credit cards has just stopped banking any other way. You know, it's a different world, and we won't always see what happens. So the trick is to try and seed that innovation and investment in various places, get people to see the real practical uses of it, and then, you know, let everybody take it from there, really. So initially, the first portfolio we did, you can see a quick summary there, was really quite interesting. It was a number of projects we did to test and use 5G in different places. I mean, you can see Orkney, which is about as remote as it gets up there, and in different situations, you know, as varied as factories, social care, and, you know, high-speed handover in cars, tracking cars, those sorts of things, as well as a number of rural projects, which include actually getting cows to eat sensors. Now, because cows have a first stomach that filters out stones, sensors stay there if they're the right weight. I mean, how cool is that, right? This is the other thing. You get to learn about things like this. Which
really
is
cool.
Yeah, it is. So, you know, the trials tested 5G across a number of those sorts of applications, you know, including drones, fruit picking, all sorts of things. So again, you know, very interesting and very real applications across the country. Next slide, please, Annette.
Yep.
Now, since then, that was a few years ago, we've moved on substantially. So right now, I think we have around about 28 projects, and though in reality there are many, many more. There are some that don't fall under the auspices of UK 5G. So these are part funded by the government under the UK 5G programme, and part funded by the consortia themselves, who normally consist of an MNO, a local body like a council. Normally a council or an educational establishment or a business will lead the bids for this work. And so we've just finished the last phase of what was called the Create project competition. And so that has led us to, you know, a very big number of projects and objectives. We released, I think the press release was at the end of December for the last set, and it includes such luminaries as David Attenborough and the Eden Project and Cowes Sailing Week. You know, there are all sorts of exciting things. And if you look at West Midland 5G, which won the Urban Connected Communities competition a couple of years ago, that actually includes a lot of different elements around innovation, around green technology, around healthcare, particularly connected ambulances, and those sorts of things across 3 major areas in the West Midlands. We also have the rural connected communities, and as I said, the Create competition, which focused primarily on the creative industry. So that includes, well, I'm sure Telecoms is, but it includes things like marketing, you know, broadcast industries, gaming, tourism, all sorts of things. So that's, you know, just a quick overview of the sorts of things we are including. And actually, to Annette's earlier point, we are actually doing some Open RAN tests as part of that, because obviously Open RAN is a notion about separate components that interoperate seamlessly together. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a particular G that it supports, but you can support 5G with it. Next slide, please. So the lessons we've learned, which are probably one of the most important things, is you know, as we've gone through, things have got easier, but there are still challenges around how we access equipment and handsets, and the supplier map was a little bit of a response to that, but that's still the case. And as Cristina and Ofcom release certain bans, again, it takes a little while sometimes for the ecosystem to catch up with that. The other thing is that, you know, not everyone speaks telco. And I think it's really, as somebody who's, I've been in telecoms for 30 odd years now, and I'm going to say we do tend to speak our own language, as do most industries, and it's something we need to be really aware of and careful about. We have been blown away actually by the enthusiasm for how, you know, how many new things, once people understand the basics around things like spectrum sharing, around private networks, that is there, around actually local authorities, for example, taking more control of their infrastructure to be able to provide social elements, and actually using elements around that instead of necessarily just rental and charging with MNOs. So there's a huge amount of potential over the next few years to change a little bit the relationships, I think, between the telecoms industry and the civic foundations of our daily life. The other thing is the other key lesson really is that doing difficult stuff is difficult, unsurprisingly. If you've got complexity and a high level of unknowns or a difficult terrain, it's hard. And the only way that you can really get things going is to be engaging and have real life stories and use cases that you can talk to people about that are meaningful to them. You know, one of the most resonant trials we've ever had that actually continues is in Liverpool, and the social care. And it means something. Most people have a parent or a child or somebody in their life they're worried about. So it's easy to translate for people to understand. And again, for technology adoption, that is absolutely critical. And that's it really. I'm going to just say again, please join uk5g.org. We welcome every new subscriber with open arms.
Ros, thank you very much. That was really, really helpful. Stop sharing now, but the filming would have captured the contacts. So please, people who want to get in touch with UK 5G, you know how to do it. Anyway, just type it into Google, you'll find it. It's dead easy. And it has some really interesting stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing now and ask Ros one or two questions before we move on. I think one of the first questions I wanted to ask was about small and medium enterprise. I'd read recently, and I can't remember quite which newspaper it was, that small and medium enterprise are not being properly supported in their desire to take advantage of 5G, and in particular, not being supported by communication service operators. And they're looking at the communication service operators to help them. You know, maybe they should be looking at you at UK 5G, but they tend to go to their communication service operators, and they're simply not getting enough support to make use of all these the wonderful technology. What can UK 5G do to move that forward, move that problem forward?
Yeah, so I mean, again, the supplier map is a start to that, to try and translate things. I think the underlying problem is that MNOs, as they are not designed to deal with those sorts. They are about mass consumer and mass business adoption, right? They're not about understanding your business, getting into the detail and supporting it. They may have some elements, and obviously some key ones do, that are built around, you know, providing that, and perhaps your fibre or your WAN as well. But really, they're not designed to support that. There are a number of smaller players who do. One of the key things from both the perspective of UK 5G and actually the supply diversity agenda is to increase the number or the capability of integrators in the UK to be able to deal with actually being that interface. I mean, I'm sure Catherine can talk about this later, because this is her expertise, is being that interface, I'm going to say, in large part. But being able to translate between, you know, what you need for your business and understand that and really listen and say, okay, so do we have a solution for you, is actually quite difficult. And I think vice versa for somebody who is in a particular industry to translate. So we are doing our best to encourage that. And again, the use cases are a part of that, because I do say inspire people to say, well, this is possible, you know, and then hopefully we can help them find a path to get there. We do actually take queries and answer them. We have a collaboration board where people can post queries and get answers as well. And, you know, we do have some active members on there. So, you know, there are lots of ways to ask for help if you want to ask for help. The problem is people have to find us first.
Right. Cristina, you need to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, Annette. And I just wanted to add to what Ross was saying, that very often to then offer a solution that might not be offered by MNO service provider, you need spectrum. And this is why we've sort of worked to enable what Ross herself was mentioning as shared access to spectrum, both on a sort of localized base, using MNO spectrum where they are not used, etc., just to make sure that we can enable as many business models as possible for private network offered by MNOs, offered by other service providers, because our experience, as well as Ofcom having engaged with the SMEs, is that very often they have their own IT provider that in reality is the one they trust and that will deliver the solution. So how can we make sure they understand that there are a variety of options in spectrum terms as well to deliver the connectivity that will enable their digital transformation? But it's a difficult journey very often to sort of explain some of the benefits to the smaller companies. I only give an example, which was one small SME in the manufacturing field that told me, oh, my IT guy is the same guy that does finance. Maybe we got a challenge there.
Yeah, no, I know that's often the problem with SMEs. That's a very good segue into Catherine's piece, which is going to be very much about the private 5G network deployment. So what I really want Catherine to do is to explain to us, she's been involved in, I know, at least 2 key deployments, one at Heathrow, one at Felixstowe Ports. And I was wondering whether you could start by telling us how the spectrum allocation has actually worked for those private networks, and how do you go about setting one up? How large an area does it have to be, and in order for a private network to work? So if you could just sort of explain to us a little bit about the way these things get conceived and then put together, that would be really helpful.
Will do, Annette. And actually, it was perfect segue, Cristina, because what I was thinking is, so I work for a mobile operator, but that doesn't mean that's always the right answer. It doesn't have to be mobile operator spectrum. Ofcom has this wonderful thing called shared access spectrum, and it really works for certain opportunities and certain locations. And to have someone, either your mobile operator or an integrator, who understands private networks, who can help guide you in what makes the best sense for you, is really the key. So some practical things about the deployment of a private network, 5G private network. I'm going to start with a port. So I know that some of these people on the board here have been out to one of the ports with me to see what it looks like and how we work there. What we've done is we've taken it up a notch, and it's really to talk about some of the things Sylvia talked about. Was with 5G, it's really about, it's not just about the reliability and security and the SLAs, which a private network can give you uniquely from what regular 5G can provide for you, but it's about the throughput and the latency, and to be able to do it in a very set area with security that you need. And also we're talking a little bit about that edge computing, with how fast does it need to get back to the device that it's powering. So one of the things that we're looking at and that we are bringing forward with one of the 5G Create opportunities that we won was, remote control cranes. And you might think that's really easy, but in the 5G world, it's new, because it has to manage the latency, it has to manage the communication and the throughput that is required. And there's some big throughput required, surprisingly. It's just not controlling a button. It's looking at the cameras, it's looking at the number of cameras, and it's how 5G works. And this is where private networks, and Cristina, you will know this more than, and Roz, more than everyone, it's also how upload and download works in the other world versus how it can work in a private network. So what we're able to do in both a port and an airport is enable the security so they can do things like turn around the airplane faster, monitor and manage all the things that go up to the airplane to make sure it gets cleaned, fuel, baggage on and off in a fast and efficient manner. And the other thing that I think Sylvia talked about, which was IoT. There's a little bit more to, there's the IoT, and then be able to manage and analyze the information that comes from that IoT, comes from the IoT device, that is able to tell someone whether a key crane, let's say as an example, is about to fail. Because in a port, or actually in a crane scenario at an airport, they want to use those pieces of equipment, that hardware, as long as they can, and take them offline exactly when they need to. And the same thing applies to the manufacturing scenario with 5G. Annette?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So the sort of applications they're using in Felixstowe is around the movement of cranes, which are presumably being used to offload large cargoes from ships. So why doesn't a Wi-Fi network do it just as well?
So one of the things about 5G is throughput and its latency. But if you can solve those problems with Wi-Fi, you still would not have the security resolved. And what the 5G licensed, whether it's a licensed MNO or licensed shared access, will provide you is that 3GPP security that comes from a licensed network. So the problem that you would have with a port if you were trying to run it on Wi-Fi is you've got a variety of vessels showing up. You know what? They all have Wi-Fi on the vessels, because those guys, what are they doing? They're surfing the net while they're sailing between ports. And what that can actually contribute to failures if the cranes are powered by Wi-Fi. So that's the key for using the 5G spectrum.
So when people are around the port using 5G from the main network, from the public network, yeah, they're not going through the private network that's being used to control the cranes or whatever it happens to be. Those are two completely separate entities that are providing connectivity. It's not that it's just a carve out in some way. It's actually very, very separate. Is that correct?
It is very separate. Yes. Yeah. There's no way for a public network to reach a private network. Yeah. That's so unique.
Yeah. So these guys, they stop their surfing on Wi-Fi and start surfing on 5G as soon as they get into the port. But that doesn't stop the cranes working.
No, absolutely not. In fact, one of the things with a private network is that, so in a mobile network, in a public mobile network, who controls where you go is the mobile network. Who controls where you go in a private 5G network is the entity. So the Port of Felixstowe actually controls the ability of their people not to surf the net. Or as when we first were talking to the Felixstowe about it, so they don't watch Formula One while they're driving the crane.
Driving cranes.
That was the key thing.
Well, that's a very big comfort, I have to say. So
exactly.
Another question about private networks. Would it be possible to deploy a private network, for example, on a large private estate or in a farm? And what sort of use cases would you look at for that?
That would be an amazing place to deploy. I think the inhibitor today, and I think Roz talked a little bit about this, was and Cristina as well, is the availability of devices.
Right.
Sylvia as well. So it would be a fantastic place to deploy a private network, and it can be used for anything from tracking the cows with the sensor in the stomach.
Yes.
Used for flying drones. I think Roz had a picture of a drone flying over a farm field to make sure that there's no intruders, to make sure the crops are growing. If you've got a large enough estate, it would be ideal.
So when you say the devices aren't available, is this 5G enabled devices? I thought there were quite a few 5G phones and the drones and all that sort of thing. If you go to Barcelona, if it ever happens again, I'm sure you'll see large numbers of 5G devices. So why aren't there any?
because there's a lot of prototypes, but there's not a lot that are off the shelf.
Right.
And for something like a farm, I mean, one of the things I spend my day doing is finding with manufacturers and trying to find more devices for my customers to use.
That's really interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah, it will come though. I can tell Cristina will drag them into existence if I don't help her first. So, yes, Cristina.
I just wanted to add the sort of a reference number. In the UK, we published this figure as of September 2020. There were only 800,000 devices, less than around 1% of the entire base of devices. So it's still starting from a very, very small base.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, looking again at the time, I'd love to spend more time on this, but I'd like to now move on to the creative industries. And again, there may be some questions at the end. We will overrun slightly, everybody. I'm sorry about that, but I think there's such an interesting set of things to talk about that I hope you don't mind. So I want now to turn to Claire and ask her to talk a little bit about the creative industries and also to share with us a short, it's about a 3-minute video of some of the uses of 5G deployed in the sports sort of arena. So Claire, perhaps you could just give us a little bit of a lowdown as to what you cover in the creative industries and some of the very interesting things, and then we can perhaps have a look at the film to finish. That'd be great.
Thank you, Annette, and thank you for having me here. It's great to be here and to see you all. So I work with Roz and also with Sylvia as part of UK 5G. My day job is I work for Red Bee Media. We're a broadcast services company, part of Ericsson, and I chair the Creative Industries Working Group as part of UK 5G. I think we were all quite surprised at how enthusiastic this group would be. We have a very active membership and recruiting all the time, largely for people coming to us saying that they'd like to join us, which is fantastic. And we cover large companies, small companies, academia, and a range of sectors from music through to advertising, theatre, heritage, galleries, broadcast, and so on. I think the key thing about 5G, everyone was very excited about remote production about 1.5 years ago. That was the big kind of use case. And of course, COVID accelerated remote production suddenly as television networks suddenly had very large gaps in them. And remote production had to move along pretty damn fast in order to create programming. And that all happened, obviously, in a pretty 4G world. So everyone was sort of scratching their heads at the end of it, going, well, what are we going to do now? But COVID has hit the creative industries really very hard. Performing arts, live events, theatres, galleries, museums have all shut. And they are pivoting away, trying to work out how to respond to that. And 5G is definitely something that they are all looking to as to provide a way of innovating their way out of this. The two key use cases we're looking at now are live and also augmented or extended reality, or a combination of the two. Live in that for television, for example, it provides an opportunity to bring events from an earthquake zone in terms of news, or from a live event for music or performing arts, or in terms of sport as well, to be able to bring these from much wider number of different places than we could before. So it could be a muddy field doing whatever it is, or an extreme adventuring, which is one of the 5G Create projects. And that's really exciting, I think, for linear schedules, which are threatened by the Netflixes and the catch-up models, is to be able to offer those live services, as they happen. So that's a big thing. And the second thing is around extended and augmented reality. And there are some really interesting things happening as well. I'm going to come to a video which kind of brings it all to life. But just to say, this work is sort of happening across the creative industries. So in theatre, for example, the RRC is launching next week, or actually, I think it's a few weeks' time, an augmented reality and interactive version of Midsummer Night's Dream. And that's been directed by Sarah Ellis, who I think was one of your previous speakers. She's a incredible thinker and does amazing things, and it's going to be great to see that happen. But it's also happening in film production, where we're using things like the Unreal Engine, which is a gaming engine behind Fortnite, to create new content, The Mandalorian, for example. And I think there is this big thing in the creative industries that we've got these great use cases that can show 5G in action, rather than necessarily talking the telecoms, which, as we said, is harder to compute, particularly, I think, for creative companies. So we try and show rather than talk, but there is it is important to do both. Shall I show the video, Annette? So this comes.
Lovely. Yes, please. Yeah.
So this comes from BT Sport, and they've been fantastic at putting videos together to really sort of show in action the kind of things that they're thinking about at the moment. Now, I'm hoping that you can see this now. I'm going to start a little bit into it, but it runs about 3 minutes. Did you see all of that?
Yes, Claire, that was fantastic. I love the taking the glasses off and he disappears.
Yeah.
So tell us how
it's a bit
we can get pairs of these glasses.
Yeah, I think I mean the glasses are definitely evolving, a bit like devices for all of this. We're at the beginning of this, and it's all to play for. We can do live stuff now, we can do remote production when it with a full set, but there's going to be so many more possibilities. And I think the creative community are ideally placed to innovate. What we'll see will come from some kid in a shed who's sort of sticking some stuff together, and we can't imagine what that will be now, but I'm pretty sure we will see it happening. And it may come from the creative communities. I think they've benefited a lot from 4G and the consumer applications with streaming media, but they will also be creating the new forms for other sectors as well. So I'm probably biased, but I think they're an exciting and important sector in this space.
Yeah, I think it's just I think that film really sort of starts to bring it home for me, because they're throwing the holograms and seeing the whole thing from different angles and so on. I just find I can't quite see how I do that in my own home, but I can see that it's possible, or maybe possible at some stage. So thank you for that. I also wanted to ask you briefly. We talked a little bit about the theatre, but what about orchestras and choirs? Would it be possible to have them? I mean, at the moment I go to a choir practice, but we all have to be on mute and sing individually. It's useless, basically. Is there a possibility through 5G for us all to sing together because we've got such low latency?
Yeah, I think so. Ericsson did a piece of work with Vodafone, actually, which was all around playing together. So we had a piano in Berlin and a singer in London, and they were playing together. Misha Dola from King's College, who some of you may know, yeah, he's amazingly talented in many ways. He was playing the piano and his daughter was doing the singing. But yeah, that would be great, because I know that the pain of remote choirs, I'm terrible at singing, but it's really hard work. So yes, I think there's all sorts of possibilities that will be brought to us. And I think also the evolution of holograms. I think what COVID has done is made us so reliant on these video technologies, which a year ago we were only just starting to use, and we're ready for those holograms now. Zoom is a very overused facility now, and actually if you could have this panel sitting in your room next to you, it would be brilliant. We'd all love that. We would be glued to our screens all the time.
You're amazing. Absolutely. That was a really lovely way to finish our panel tonight, to share some of those really forward thinking and very exciting new things that are coming. I think, you know, sort of for me, it's brought 5G to life is hearing all of you talk about the things that make it happen and the things that are really, really happening. But I think my last question to all of you is, when do you think this will all become mainstream? So I don't know who wants to kick off with that one, but it seems to me there's a lot of experimental stuff going on, but when will it become mainstream?
There's you know, this saying about technology, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but it basically means we always think things will be sooner when we're looking at them now. So, you know, we'll think it's 2 years, but in 10 years time, we'll be amazed actually at how quickly everything came along. Yeah. And I think that remains true. I think it, you know, it's a few years because there's a bunch of stuff about, you know, devices, the ubiquity of them, the cost of them, you know, those sorts of things. But if you look even at the advances in VR, what you can do in hospitals, what you can do in repairs, you know, the fact that realistically, you know, I think people will be much more aware of contacted infectious disease, and also the fact that you just don't need to travel. Why do we all sit on a train together, you know, twice a day for like a couple of hours? What on earth makes us think that? So I think there's a wide number of use cases or draw those things. I do think it'll be a few years before we're like flicking stuff up and, you know, in our classes that we're wearing.
I think one has to be realistic about that. I think you're right, but it is lovely to see some of it. Anybody else want to chip in on that before I ask the audience if they've got any specific questions? I haven't seen anything particular on the chat, but if you do have questions, please put them on the chat, and we'll unmute and let you ask those questions. Okay.
Yeah, also to add, perhaps we can learn from the history. So for LTE or 4G, it takes 10 years for the subscription reach a peak high, picking up the technology for the consumer sector. I see 5G is accelerating, so maybe we can add 8 years, roughly 7-8 years for a massive adoption because of the history data.
Yes, I see Mike has put in some information about 250 million customers on 5G announced at Shanghai this week, a forecast of 1 billion 5G globally by the end of 2023. Thank you. So you've answered some of our question there, but even so, it still feels to me as we're at the beginning and not yet in the middle. We have a question actually here from Christine. Audrey, is it possible for us to unmute and so on?
Yes, I think actually we could now, if everybody wants to turn their cameras back on, Christine, you should be able to unmute yourself. But if you can't, let me know and I will do it for you.
No, I think she has.
You can, yes. I was just going to ask about health risks of 5G because there's been a lot of talk in the press over the past couple of years. Just wondering, you know, to get some views on that.
Yeah, so if I just pick up on that briefly. So yeah, there have been a lot of things about it, and there are a number of topics conflated in some of the speculation. What I will say is Cristina will pick this up because Ofcom actually have a regulatory duty to make sure that we're safe. And there's this thing called ICNIRP, which, you know, it's very exciting, but there are basically a bunch of regulations that mean you can only broadcast at certain powers. In the same way, those of us who are old enough remember there was a massive panic about microwaves when they first came out, and we had the same thing around 4G. You know, it's all about safety and safety testing and making sure that we comply by the regulations. All of the work I've ever done with this has been so far below the regulations that, you know, it is incredibly safe. You would need to literally like wrap yourself around an antenna pole. Cristina? Sorry, you're a bit patchy there, Cristina.
Cristina? Sorry, yeah. Yes, and thanks. Thanks. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
We can now. Yes, that's better.
Okay. Thanks, Ross. Okay, excellent. Thanks. Thanks, Ross. Just to add that, yes, so Ofcom has just published at the end of last year its decision to actually amend all of the licenses requiring compliance with the international agreed safety standard agreed by ECNIRP, which is a UN sort of organization, and that sets the level of the emission. In addition, we've worked with Public Health England, which has the sort of, which own the messaging with regard to any potential medical risk, but we decided to work with them to actually measure the emission around the base station. So we've carried out several measurement campaigns that have absolutely proved, as Rose was saying, that the emission are a fraction, a really, really small fraction of the limits set by ECNIRP. And we've published with a result. We've participated in a campaign with Public Health England. So we're really trying to provide the evidence, the technology evidence, and in the case of PHE, the medical evidence that there is no risk with regards to 5G emissions.
So it didn't cause COVID.
If we could put particles like that in radio waves, that would be really interesting, but we can't. At least not that I'm aware of. But what I would say as well is, you know, the amount of radiation you get from your TV is slightly more powerful than what you are likely to receive from a 5G mask, just to put it in some form of context.
Presumably the radiation you get from your microwave similarly.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, those are pretty well shielded, and you should shut the door before you start them still.
But I bet people don't. This is true.
Yeah, but we've all been doing wrong all these years.
Yeah, exactly. Anne, you've got a question.
Hi. Just that was a really interesting reference to the health issues, and just wondered if you could go a little further and compare the output to wireless LAN and regular 3G, 4G cell phone, etc.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Sylvia or Cristina do. I would say, you know.
So I don't know the answer either, but I suspect, particularly in the case of wireless LAN, so your Wi-Fi as an example, the low power emission of Wi-Fi is relatively small, and clearly out there there are only products that are in line with the ECNIRP regulation. So I would say that clearly we're talking about something that is much lower than those levels. I cannot benchmark them and put them one above the other. I don't know the figures.
Sylvia, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, agreeing with what Cristina said, and I'm just going to put a reference paper to IET's 5G health paper. So
in the chat,
in the chat box. So in terms of spectrum, of course, you know, Wi-Fi, you know, around 5 giga or 2.4 gigahertz. That's essentially the same spectrum as, you know, 5G would be using, right? So in that sense, the fact that 5G is actually transmitting less, is 23 dB, right? But Wi-Fi, you can go up to 31 dB. So in that sense, it's below, as Cristina said, below the transmission level of what we have with Wi-Fi, for example.
No, good. Thank you. Given that we're almost out of time and there aren't any other questions at this stage, I think what I'd like to do is to wrap it up very gently and thank our panel enormously for an amazing tour de force around 5G. It certainly helped me to put it more into perspective and to understand just why people are talking about it every day, all the time, and where this is all going. So a huge thank you from WiTT, from all our audience. And wish you well to get the whole thing done over the next few years. Before you all leave, I'd also like to briefly talk about the upcoming events that we have. Our next event is March the 16th, It's going to be another TED Circles. For those of you that came to the TED Circles last time, this is a short film and then a discussion around the theme, which we will then just write up briefly. It's a members only event. Obviously, if you're not a member and are interested, then just email us, get in touch through the website. That's not a problem. It's going to be around the talk that Catherine Buskill gave at TEDx Manhattan Beach, called The Unforeseen Consequences of a Fast-Paced World. I think that will be a really interesting subject for us to have a discussion around. So that will be on March the 16th at 6 o'clock. On April the 21st, we're going to participate in Girls in ICT Day with Avril MacDonald, who you might remember spoke at one of our fireside chats a little while back. And she's really looking at what STEM careers can do for you, and would like everybody who comes, if they can, to bring a youngster girl, if possible, with them to try and answer that question. It will be done around a questionnaire and a quiz and some interesting stuff for the participants to get involved with, which will help them to understand the types of things that they could do, which fall within the STEM agenda. And there are just so many different things that you can get involved with STEM, and it'll be interesting to see how that comes out. And we've got 1 or 2 schools participating. So again, look on the website for further details. And I think that's really all I need to say. Audrey, is there anything else that I've forgotten that I need to say at this stage?
No, I think those were the key messages. We'll be communicating about the rest of our year soon. We're just working out how much more will be on Zoom.
Yes,
A few more months, obviously.
Yeah, well, at least until May. Maybe we'll be able to meet in June, but we may not. It might still have to be socially distanced.
Yeah, I think
probably won't work
yes.
so well.
I think so.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. So let's aim for September or October. Oh, a winter party. There we go.
Yeah.
Great. Well, look, thank you all again, and stay to chat if you want to, but everybody is the meeting's finished. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice
Great
to see you.
session.
Nice to see you.